that idea of uncertainty, it can be a cold boat, if you will, like in the Matrix. It can be a cold ship that you're sitting on, eating the porridge, everything's run down around you, but you have an authenticity and you have a freedom that creates a love and a joy and a connection that you never thought possible. And nobody can convince you of that. It has to be experienced.
I'm here with Darrin Ford. Darrin, here we are connecting, and little did I know, you and I actually have a very similar outlook to approaching sex and porn addiction. Both of us, I don't call it recovery. I think recovery comes with this implication that there will one day be a recovered state. I don't see it that way. I see it as a self-mastery process. How many of these beliefs did I put here, and how many of these beliefs did somebody else put here, and do I actually believe them? How did they get here? Right? This inquisitive nature of how am I acting this way, and how come this is happening to me when I don't want this to happen to me, right? And so I think, you and I kind of share this interesting outlook. You call it mindfulness. I call it self-mastery, more or less the same thing. But Darrin, how about you give us a little intro for the listeners of how do you define mindfulness for those of you for those listening who don't know what that means?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think before we even define mindfulness, right, we need to define what is mind. You hear all of these mindfulness people talk about mindfulness, but first we have to just look at what is the mind. So really what we do is we look at the mind as the wetware, right, or as the software of the brain, right? So the brain is the hardware or the wetware, and the mind is the video screen or the operating system. Right. So when your senses take in data from your environment, it gets organized and coordinated. You reflect on the past and you spit out a hypothesis about the future. That organizing and coordinating of the information you get from your other sense organs, the reflection on your past and the hypothesis about the future, that is what mind does. And so we have these beliefs, we have these thoughts, we have these lenses that the mind focuses these beliefs and these thoughts through. Unlike traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, where you just start with the thoughts, with mindfulness, really you're starting with the emotion or the energetic state in the body. That is the first part that arises when you think about conscious focus. And we know that that's in fact the way that cognitive neural processing happens. How do we know that? Because of the evolutionary development of the brain, the emotion centers, the reflex centers, and then the cortex, which is the thinking portion of the brain. And so the mind follows that trajectory, and the mind is always skewed by the events of the past. Mm-hmm. So our mind is never 100% accurate in its hypothesis, right? It's always skewed towards what has happened to us in the past. And so I will often tell people that what's arising in your life is a reflection of the past causes and conditions of your life. It's not a reflection of who you are. Mm-hmm. It's not a reflection of your values. It's not a reflection of some sort of disease or anything like that. And it is just the byproduct of the past causes and conditions. And that entire being aware of and being able to see that entire process, that is the all-encompassing idea of mindfulness.
And I'd like to point out too, Darrin, that for those listening, it's not just things that have happened to you. It's things that have happened to others that you have witnessed. It's things that could potentially happen to you. And it is things that have potentially happened to others around you. So again, it's not always just your past. Cause I know there's a lot of people thinking that I can't think of any reason why I would be doing these. Again, it's an assessment of everything that has happened to everyone in the past and anything that could happen to anyone in the future, right? So it's this huge network of possibilities and this huge network of things that we have actually witnessed or that we have heard rumor of that someone told us has happened to somebody else. Do you share the same view on that, Darrin?
Absolutely, right. And that's really all of the data that the mind takes in from the environment as you grow up, because the mind has a tyrannical focus, and that focus is on, survival, right? Getting through each moment in the safest way possible so that later you can procreate, or the species can live on or do whatever it needs to do. And that's the mind's only job. The mind's job isn't to really help us see reality as it is, right? In fact, Daniel Hoffman talks about in his books, The Argument Against Reality, right? How the mind really is, and they have a lot of data now to show this, that the mind, it does not tell us the truth about our environment. The mind tells us whatever it believes we need to know to survive the moment. And when you are acting on a survival mechanism in a world where you are no longer needing to take action to just survive, then you start to become detached from what is effective for you versus this need, the trying to focus on survival. And that's that bifurcation, that disconnection is where, right, we start to get ourselves into trouble in having these habitualized behaviors that are not skillful.
Yeah, I like that. Darrin, I had an idea. Are you okay if I bring up like an example of my acting out, and we can more or less kind of pop in and out of it as we march through your kind of framework of how you deal with this? Because I'm trying to think of a way, I'm trying to be a really practical way in a short amount of time to have guys wrap their head around this in context to sexual behavior. Are you cool if I kind of bring that up?
Sure, absolutely.
So I would love, yeah, because I'd love for you to kind of break me down. And I'm not sure how many of the steps and phases we're going to work through your kind of methodology with this, but we'll get as far as we can. And if we have to do a second episode, we'll do a second episode. So Darrin, the first thing that comes up to mind with that, and I always use my own examples because it's easiest for me to speak to the delusional world that my mind told me I was living in. And this resonates with a lot of other high achievers and entrepreneurs. They typically tend to be outgoing, charismatic people, and because of that, and aspirational people. So much of their life is living in a way to make sure that they are going to live up to their aspirations. So what the context that I wanted to kind of talk to everybody of showing you how the mind does this was, when I was a little boy, I didn't fit in. I wasn't cool yet. I found my mind eventually helped me get there, and turned me into a sex addict, but we'll get there in a second. But the story that my mind told me was that I was not enough yet, and that there were these things that people do in the world to become enough. Okay. So as Darrin's kind of talking to us, that was what my mind was collecting all this data. My mind was like, oh, hey, Roland, I figured out how this world works. There's these certain things, these benchmarks and these metrics that if you hit them, and the more of them you hit, the better of a person you'll be, the more people will like you, and the more famous and memorable and meaningful your life will be, right? So that was what my mind told me. Some of these things, Darrin, were the hotter the women and the more of them gave me confirmation that they wanted to be with me, sleep with me, leave their husbands for me. That was one measure. My physical appearance, right? So how good my muscles looked, how good I dressed. Another one, and this one was the one that got me in the most trouble, was getting yourself into positions socially where other people can't get. So putting yourself into a cabana with bottle service and filling the cabana with all these gorgeous women, and having everyone look at me and wish that they could be me. So my mind is telling me, hey, Roland, if you want to be great, have a meaningful existence, and be someone that everyone wants, that you need to become someone everyone wants to be, was basically what my mind said. Was a successful life is if men want to be you and women want to sleep with you. Was the recipe. And here's all of the steps that I need to go through to be able to get to that point. And that more or less was my life for multiple decades. I'll let you kind of jump in there before we go on. But within your framework, how would you kind of dissect someone like that?
Yeah. So the first thing, right, is I always say, be careful if you point at. I'm sorry, my camera. Yeah, be careful if you point at, because you have three fingers pointing back at yourself.
Yep.
So as you were sharing, I'm hearing this common theme in your mind story, right? And the mind story is really the ideas that are projected. I need to be seen by everybody to be shown that I'm enough. That's kind of the theme of what, right? I'm going to be above, I'm going to prove I'm enough, right?
And the antithesis being, if no one's looking at me, then I must not matter.
There you go, right? And so then my first question to you, if you were a client, would be, where in your life do you remember the first time learning this idea that you aren't enough?
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
And we would have a reflection, and it would go right back to maybe interactions or communications you had within your family system
Mhm.
where you were shamed. It might even be nonverbal. In other words, because we want to remember, how does the nervous system develop, right? A child doesn't know that it exists because its parent holds it, or because its parent says, here's my child, or the
Mhm.
child says, oh, here's me and there's my parent. The child has no I me concept. It just absorbs the emotional energy, the heat from the body. This is why a baby in its crib on the other side of the house will start crying when two parents may not be yelling. They may be sitting in the living room, but they're fighting, and then the baby starts crying because its nervous system just
Mhm.
picks up the emotional energy. So the nervous system, as it develops, if you're a kid and you're immersed in an environment where shame is non-processed, in other words,
Mhm.
it's just, it's an underlying ether in the ecosystem, then your nervous system's going to absorb that. And
Mhm.
as you grow up, you're going to have a flooding relationship to shame. In other words, very little shame,
Mhm.
very difficult to manage the distress. And then the mind's going to say, oh, that must be because there's something wrong with me. And now we're off to the races. And this is how the data stream creates the mental processes. So the first part is coming to that shame and saying, how can you stay present with this?
Mhm.
Because, and this is a big word, isomorphism. I always call it the law of isomorphism. All things are interconnected. If you are not able to sit with your own shame, then you will not be able to maintain presence with others when they experience
Mhm.
the distress of shame or any emotion, because the mental story that you have is, I'm not good enough.
Mhm.
And oh my gosh, this person's feeling distressed. I can't help them. I'm not good enough. And then that's going to motivate these behaviors to manage them so that you can manage yourself. And there's a lot here, but hang in there with me.
Mhm.
That creates what's called an external locus of control, where all of a sudden now, to manage and control your life, your mind is trying to control all of the things outside of you. And that results in you not managing what's
Mhm.
going on in here.
Mhm.
That means that the less you're managing what's going on in here, the more flooding it becomes, because the less distress you can tolerate. So the more you have to try to do things out here to manage. So the more women you'll need, the more pornography you'll need, the more, whatever you'll need, the more money, the more companies, the more this, the more that. And this, although can have some what they call positive side effects, right? I mean, it's always nice to be a billionaire or a millionaire, in many ways. At the same time, though, it creates this tempest inside of you that's emotionally, reactively driven, and no longer meeting your own needs of connection and love and value and all of these things.
Mhm. The when you're saying that, because that's what Darren's speaking about there, right? Is all you guys know this progresses, right? We all are doing progressively more and more and more and more and more of these acting out behaviors. In my case, Darren, and again, we're always that's one of the things about doing any psychology work is we're speculating. I mean, nobody knows actually what the story was. We're just taking our best guess based off of the literature that's available, the science that's available, and our assessment of your experience, right? And for me, my guess, Darren, I'd love for you to speak to this because I haven't, I've as you're talking, I'm always reflecting on the example that I brought up, right? So for me, Darren, and again, I'm guessing, right? I'd love your feedback on this. So here I am, I'm trying to feel enough by getting more and more of these women to notice me. And then it doesn't work because it works at the time, but then I go back to my hotel room where I'm flying home and the feeling comes back. So my guess is, and again, it's my best guess, my assumption is, oh, well, they just needed to be hotter and there needed to be more of them. Right. I needed more people to see, and so again, I'm just guessing. Is that an example of the mind telling me, oh, hey, this just didn't work. You just need to do more.
Absolutely, right? And why does the mind say that? Well, because when you were younger, it did work
Mm-hmm.
to a great extent, right? Because it created this disconnection and this numbing, because the adult you, right, that prefrontal cortex wasn't here.
Mm-hmm.
But now it no longer works because the environment you're in is completely different. You're no longer a powerless human, in this environment where you're just getting bombarded with this distressing emotional uh, context, right? And so that's exactly what happens, right? So then it just spirals down, or right, that's called tolerance and addiction,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the first step that we want to do in that is to have you start to realize two things, actually three things. One, what the emotion is. So versus all of the thought, which means disidentifying with the mind story or separating your identity from the story that your mind creates, right? That's one step. The byproduct, when the side effect of doing that is you'll start to feel the emotion that you've been trying to numb yourself to or distract yourself from. So we want to teach you how to feel that emotion, have a vocabulary for that emotion, how to maintain presence with that emotion, right? And that's where mindfulness comes in.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing is to help you accept another fundamental law, which is that everything in the universe is transitory. No feeling is final. So no matter how distressing that feeling is, it is not permanent. The mind will tell you, the addictive mind will tell you this is never going to end. And I'm not saying that there aren't distressing emotions that don't last for quite a long time, but all things are temporary. All things, wealth, prestige, distress, all of it's temporary. It rises, crests, and falls, and so we have to start to align with that. And that can create a tremendous amount of also insecurity, by the way, because when we take that to the nth degree, right? When we play that all the way, we play that tape all the way through, we start to realize that the idea of certainty is actually a fabrication, that all things in the universe are uncertain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And these are very frightening things, but they're
Or
reality.
justice, justice is the one that scares everybody, right? When they find out that that justice is a man-made concept as well. It's like, next thing you know, you're living in this world where you don't really know if anybody really knows what's going on, and then justice is a fabricated concept. And next thing you know, like you said, it is frightening. It's a reason why, in the Matrix, right, when he's given two options, he's like, hey, just make sure you want to actually take this pill, because when you understand, I think I love that movie, The Matrix, because the truth of reality is much like that movie shows. It's not all butterflies and whistles where there's these clear paths to get attention and admiration. The truth is, reality is much like that ice cold ship where everybody's eating porridge, after they take the red pill, because it's the truth is life is full of a ton of uncertainty and a lot of false promises. And I think a lot of us don't want to know that, because it starts to put into question how you're living your life. And I think a lot of people don't really want to question it. It's a lot more comfortable to it's a very convenient story that me buying this car is going to earn me the respect and attention of my community. I like that story. And when I find out that attention is false, I was actually quite sad when I found out about that, because basically all of my little weasel strategies that I came up with to prove to people that I was better than them, found out it was all BS, that all of it was man-made and fabricated. And that even if I did win their attention, Darrin, I want everybody to listen to this too. Even when I did win their attention, I knew in my core that I was casting a spell on them. And so it never really meant anything to me, because it was part of this big elaborate scheme that I knew was a scheme. And so I'm just trying to explain to everybody, for those of you listening, when a lot of the reason why a lot of these attempts that we make don't fulfill us is deep down, your authentic self knows that you are casting spells on everybody around you. And that even if they are coming over to your house, they may not be coming over because they actually like you. They might be coming over because of the elaborate spell that you told them was going to happen when they came to your party, right? Falling for the facade, right? And I think I just wanted to explain that, because there's a lot of men who have chased success and it didn't really feel like success. And it's because, in the end, your mind knows what real success is versus fake success. And I think that's why a lot of the time it doesn't really mean a whole lot. In the end, we just followed the rules and got the A, or got the client, or whatever it was that the rules told us we would get. And that was pretty much all there was, right? It wasn't, I always tell people this: don't expect man-made strategies to deliver on a divine promise. Fulfillment comes, if you guys want to know how to get fulfilled, read any psychology book, religious book. I mean, like it's been written for thousands of years, yet here we are chasing these things that actually your own grandmother told you wouldn't make you happy, and you ignored her, right? So before I ask you the next question, I'll give you a chance to respond to that if there's anything you want to say.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things there, right? And I actually tell people I work with this all the time, and a lot of people tell me, actually, like, no, I'm good. I don't want to do this. It's like, okay, then I'm not the right person for you to work with, because I'm a difficult. I tell clients all the time, I'm a difficult therapist or a difficult coach to work with. You may not want to work with me because I follow the Edom that mental health is the absolute commitment to reality, no matter what the cost, from M. Scott Peck. And that means I'm going to take the boat of awareness and I'm going to turn it right into the emotions of waves, and we're going to floor it. And it's going to be a heck of a ride. It's going to be terrifying. It's going to be overwhelming, flooding, but we'll make it through. We won't go into a place where we destroy the boat, but we're still going in that direction. The other thing that I would share too is that idea of uncertainty. It can be a cold boat, if you will, like in the Matrix. It can be a cold ship that you're sitting on. You eating the porridge, everything's run down around you, but you have an authenticity and you have a freedom that creates a love and a joy and a connection that you never thought possible. And nobody can convince you of that. It has to be experienced. And this is where that surrender and that idea of trusting has to create, you have to, unfortunately, just absolutely surrender and trust somebody on the path more than you trust yourself in the beginning. And that's extremely hard for people who have been enormously successful to do, right? Because they have, even though they don't trust themselves, they have a tremendous amount of people who have, fallen for the image and trust them, right? And those ideas of, wow, he's done so much, he's done all of these things, or she's done all of these things, so they really know the right way, and then that puts a lot of pressure on you as a person, especially if you don't trust yourself. The other thing that I would share is, money is great and wonderful, but if you drive through a drive-through in a Lamborghini, right? And this is the fundamental problem with wealth and fame. If you drive through a drive-through with a Lamborghini, the person in the drive-through is going to rant and rave, but when you leave, the only thing they remember is the car. They don't even remember you. And that's the problem with wealth and fame, is that we, think that it's going to create this focus on us, but it only creates a focus on our stuff, right? And the connections that you're surrounded with. People don't understand, when you become a multimillionaire or billionaire, the interactions you have, money is intertwined in all your interactions, all your friends, all your interactions. Everything is centered around the exchange and the process of money in some way, shape, or form. And that can be incredibly dysregulating, because it's like, well, where do I fit in all of this? Right.
Darrin, I love that you went there, because that was one thing I was going to say, is there's this emphasis, and this is largely the reason that I started my program, was this emphasis failed me in my recovery. There was this obsession with, you use acting out to cope with your negative feelings. Well, a lot of my clients live some pretty awesome lives. They love their jobs. Typically, they've got, they're successful guys. It's not, they're not suffering like quite a lot of people. And so when they're hearing this, oh, you're acting out because you're unhappy, it's like, no, I'm plenty happy. I mean, we'll be at a resort, one of the nicest resorts in all of Mexico, and my family will go downstairs and go to a thing, and I'll act out in the room before I go downstairs, right? I mean, it's like, it's not always in that linear format. And I think I love what you said there, is I think what high achievers don't realize is how empty they are. And I think they can't acknowledge it, because the world is constantly telling you you're not empty because you have everything that everybody is aspiring to get, right? You already have it all, and everyone out there is torturing themselves to have your life. They want to be you is the story.
Yeah.
The challenge though is that's all fine and dandy, like you said. However, what if I'm not happy? And I think the one thing I wanted to just add to that, it's kind of a tangent, but I think it's important just since we're on this topic, is guys, you can't control what fulfills you. You were born with things, with attention that means something to you, with validation that means something to you, respect that means something to you. And you can't make them think that your R8 makes you respectful. I mean, you can like that story. You can have bought into that story. You know, likely Audi did really great marketing to convince you of that. I remember that's why I bought an R8, and I bought it because Christian Grey on 50 Shades of Grey, which all the women were obsessed with that. I was like, all right, well, I'm just going to buy his car because then that would make me looked at like he was. Again, the challenge is what if a Roland was not designed to have that attention mean anything to me, which I'll tell you right now, it meant nothing. I like to be appreciated for my intellect. I like to be appreciated for helping somebody solve a complex problem they weren't able to solve on their own. I mean, that stuff means the world to me. But yeah, you noticing the things that I have acquired, I don't know. That doesn't really fulfill my soul. So I just wanted to bring that up. Darrin, I have to ask, and this is what everybody's wondering is, let's show us how this works. Like, so here I am, I'm struggling with this. It's why I'm listening to this podcast, right? I'm trying to either recover or become more recovered and create more additional safety in my life and my marriage. How does this, let's get really granular with the treatment here. So let's use my example. So I come into your office. I'm not really a big porn watcher. It's really conquesting after women. And the more attractive the women, the bigger the hit, right? It's more around bragging, showing, spending tons of money in front of my friends, right? So this is my condition. And as I always say it, women just got caught in the crossfire. I personally never identified as a sex addict. I was not addicted to boobs, vaginas, and orgasms. Honestly, my big rush was having these women want me and having these men want to be me. That was everything to me, right? So I come into your office and my wife caught me and she's found out about these 19 various interactions that I have had. I need to overcome this. Talk to me about this process. What would you do? What would you do with me? Show these guys a little bit granularly of how this works. I think they're all bought in, but it's like, all right, come on, let's cut to the chase. What do I do about this? How, if I was to engage in treatment where mindfulness was kind of the centerpiece, talk to us about how that looks so these guys kind of wrap their head around it.
Yeah. And I think, so the first step, as I was saying before, right, is to start to give you a vocabulary and help create awareness of the stories that your mind projects and the emotionality that's underneath, right? The next step really is to help you understand that the mind is the tool that we use to relate to everything in our reality. So we have to start to look at everything. And really what that means is the 8 domains of recovery. So, and what I would share with you is this can be very difficult for high achievers because high achievers are used to being out of balance in success and all of these things, right? How do you run a multi-million-dollar company? Well, you're not going to be able to run a multi-million-dollar company if you aren't extreme in some ways, right? And that's why there's this idea of conquest sex, right? Because you want to get, like, you want to prove you're enough, you want to do enough. So there's this intensity and this idea of conquering the next thing. And that pattern would not be just existent in your life around women. It would also be existent around goals that you have financially, goals that you have, educationally, right? All of these other areas of your life. And so we're going to start to look at how you can cultivate awareness in all of those domains: the domain of sex, the domain of relationship with self and others, the domain of work, domain of sleep, which is the most important domain, because if you're not sleeping properly, then everything else your mind is going to do is skewed, right? And we go through all of these domains and we help you start to see that the goal really isn't about cessation of the behavior. Mm-hmm. I mean, yes, we want to help you create boundaries around the behavior in the short run, because that's going to help turn you into the emotions, and then give you a skill set. But that's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal, and I say this in my Awakening to the Sexually Addicted Mind book, is equanimity or balance. To create this balanced life where, you know, you're not too far on this extreme and you're not too far on that extreme. And if you start to get too far on those extremes, you have enough awareness to create a intervention, or what I call a POA, a plan of action, that will allow you to then bring things back down. Now, this can be very hard. Working with physicians, attorneys, things like that. They're like, yeah, but you know, when I'm in the middle of a surgery and I'm there for 16 hours, you know, I don't have time to be all of this balanced. And I'm like, hey, no, we don't want you to be balanced, right? If you are working in a job and you're a first responder or something like that, and you have to have hyper intensity, we want you to be able to do that in those moments. And you're probably very good at it. And so we need that, right? It's not about destroying these aspects. It's about having these aspects in the driver's seat during the times that it's most effective, and then learning how to transition out of that, right? So you might have that hyper intensive focus at work, you know, closing a big deal if you're in sales and you're selling, you know, doing a $70 million deal or something, right? But then after that's done, you need to be able to transition back to grounding and balance so that you can then be present with your family, right? And this is extremely important. So that we do through mindfulness practice, through cultivating awareness through actual mindfulness practice. Now, what does that mean? That does not mean sitting on a cushion and going like la 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 la. I mean, you can do that. That's fine. You know, I enjoy doing that, and you can do that, but you don't have to. When I talk about mindfulness, I talk about weaving it into your everyday life, right? Driving in the car, shutting the radio off, and just noticing your breath while you drive, right? Maybe you have to fly somewhere. What a wonderful opportunity to put noise canceling headphones on and notice your breath, right? Instead of pounding away at the keyboard and working, right? These are small things. Everyday interventions. So there are what we call mind states. Mind states are the lens that focus the mind story. So like if you have a judgmental mind state, then all your mind stories will have the theme of judgment, right? I'm not enough. I'm not, your example that you used earlier, right? That theme of like, I need to prove I'm enough. That's a judgmental mind state. So if we notice that, we can take that unskillful mind state out and put a skillful one in. One like curiosity, right? So if we put that one in, every mind story that we have will be focused on being curious about something. Why am I driving that? Why is that driving my thought process? Why am I having this desire? Let me be curious about that. What is that doing for me? And so what I do is I take the 5 skillful mind states, which are curious, generosity, compassion, empathy, and I can't remember the other one right now, so I'm not going to worry about it. But yeah, we put them all into have little cards, wrinkle them up, put them in a bowl next to our bed, and we just pull it up. We open one up, and maybe it says generosity mind state. And by the way, generosity is not giving people money; it's trusting in the unfolding of the universe. Many entrepreneurs, right? They have a very optimistic outlook, right? Otherwise, they wouldn't do what they do. Who would think that they could build a $60 million company? Somebody who has a very optimistic outlook. So, you know, but that's a skillful mind state. And we can see how that skillful mind state has allowed them to be enormously successful in that way. Right. And so what we want to do is just take that. We literally
Darrin, a lot of mine act out and cheat on my wife. I would say if I look at all the ones that I use to become more successful, none of them value monogamy or really acknowledge the existence of others at all. They're hyper focused on my existence being really, really good. So I wanted to interject there because as every guy's listening to this, that's what Darrin's talking about is, hey, there's no problem when you're going to do surgery to pull that guy out and go do the surgery. What Darrin's telling you is be mindful enough to turn it off when the surgery's over. Because what started happening to me was everyone fell in love with all of those various skill sets that I would turn on. And eventually I was like, well, no one liked me before and they all like me now. So I'm going to oscillate between these 6 different, very skilled versions of myself. The problem was all of them acted out and honestly weren't monogamous. There was one that was monogamous, and I would turn him on from time to time when I'm hanging out with my wife. But the truth was, when I wasn't with her, which was, and I'm doing all these other things, all of these other skill sets. I just bring that up because, what Darrin's talking about is when you pull that lens over, you see the whole world through that lens. So yes, in this particular sale, I can manipulate them to get them to like me so I can close this. And if you're selling them something that's going to help them, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You're convincing them and getting them over their fear and distrust to trust you so that they can allow this help in. And in many ways, good therapists do a lot of that. What Darrin's talking about though is, and I just wanted to shine light on that, is guys, especially for my guys, high achievers, a lot of your personas, or whatever we want to call them, egos, identities, parts, a lot of them act out.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, right? That idea of like, oh, these different compartments, me over here versus me over here. And what we want to recognize is there really are no compartments. And although you can turn this hyper-focused persona, if you will, on in certain work fashions or certain times, we have to be able to be, like you were saying, mindful enough to recognize not only that we need to also, rebalance after that, however, that we have to be mindful enough to recognize that we struggle to rebalance after that. And this is the part where I think it becomes extremely difficult for high achievers, because high achievers, they tell themselves like, oh no, I'll have to take control. I'll have to do it, versus being able to slow down and admit, you know what, this is really difficult to do. I mean, the concept is easy. Sit, notice your thoughts, okay, no big deal. But doing that and doing it in a consistent manner, in a manner that allows you to truly recognize the interconnected nature of yourself and all the things around you and the emotionality you feel, is enormously difficult to do. And it is not something that you do overnight. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get out overnight. Right? This isn't a 1 quarter fix.
Yeah. Amen. Well said. Yeah. It's why I call it self-mastery and not recovery. Is, really the name of the game is understanding, hey, it makes sense. Mastery of self. Hey, it makes sense for me to act this way right here. And I need to be aware enough to turn it off, because that guy, if I keep him on and we're not in this meeting and he's over at the bar, he's going to flirt. He's going to, I know how I know how he views people. Yeah. That's why Darrin's saying this is hard. And Darrin, it's extremely hard in the United States in 2025. I mean, we definitely, your society is constantly telling you to do these very things that your recovery is telling you not to do. So Darrin, how can people get a hold of you? How do they get a hold of the book? What's the book called? Give us kind of information for those who listened, who really like what they heard today, if they were going to try to reach out to you and learn more about this.
Sure. Well, you can always, go to our website, which is mindfulcenters.com. And, there's free consultation, tons of ways to get a hold of me. Feel free to email me, Darrin, Darrin, at mindfulcenters.com. And the books are available. Awakening to the Sexually Addicted Mind, available. You can get it Barnes and Noble, Amazon, everywhere. And that's a book that you would actually read, and then there are activities to do at the end of each chapter, and it kind of tells my story as well as what somebody can do. And then if you want a workbook, I have Transforming the Addictive Mind, which is a workbook, 30-day workbook that you do, which is extremely difficult to do, I will say. For a lot of people, they come back and say this is really hard, but of course it is, right?
Yeah, self-mastery. Like you said something really great. It's like, I know the reality can sometimes be hard, but as a saying that you guys have all probably heard, once you see, you can't unsee. And the other people that have written a different book, and they said, the truth prevails, the truth, and those sayings are said for a reason. The truth will set you free. I mean, it is, and it always does. Yeah. Even if the reality is more painful than the delusion, it's still freeing. But Darrin, this was awesome, man. I have a feeling you and I are going to do this again. I feel like we just scratched the surface. I can't wait to see you at ITAP. Maybe you and I will have to talk a little bit more about this and do an episode number 2.
I'd love it. I'd love it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Darrin.